Okay, Frank Watson with John Lowe here. Old guys exploring technology and commenting on the world.
That's
And
right.
we have a guest in the background today, Barbara McNamara. My wife is up and drinking tea and eating key lime pie. And uh, last session with Tom Probasco, we we were getting into your analysis of left and right political wings. And if would you like to recap that?
Well, we could. Is Tom here? You
Oh,
gonna
I
be with us?
don't think Tom's going to make it today.
Okay. Well, now you do have the copy, I think now. Were you able to print it or read it?
John, I have trouble reading it.
Well, it's small print. And
Well, and I have eye problems, so
so
uh,
do I. So do I. Well, uh we I at the beginning of the paper I had capitalism and defined in a series of statements, and then the Republican uh, sort of understanding of its characteristics as a party, and also with the Democrat, and that sort of traditional views of capitalism, the Republican Party and the Democrat. And then I had a separate area there that dealt with the way it is today. So the traditional versus in comparison to the present. And you remember anything where we left off in your thinking? So I don't necessarily have to start all over.
I think that if you simply kind of
Review it a little bit.
do a lay out how you see the world today based on your education and a lifetime
Mhm.
experience.
But and my recent study,
Yes.
research. Uh, the way I look at it today is the Republican Party is headed up by a leader who tends in the direction of fascism without necessarily naming who he is. Well, we did so in our last gathering. Um, a leader or autocrat who has emerged, whose goal is to elevate his own office and power above the Constitution and its system of democratic election and government balance of power. He is a strict nationalist and opposed to promoting and defending freedom and democratic globalism. So, any questions on that point of view, first of all?
Well, I think that what I would like to know is how does that differ from uh, the other choice, the other person, the other leader?
Well, the other leader I would say is a Democrat, of course, and in this case, and he represents the Democratic Party, which I didn't read off the Republican point of view, um, but the left is bent. I'm sorry. His point of view as a Democrat is a balance of capitalism with human need, full employment, fair wages, humane working conditions, larger government to curtail trust abuses and promote welfare programs. And so I would see him as a centrist, slightly probably leaning to the left, but of course he upholds democracy and is stressing that a great deal. He wants to defend democracy against the inroads and the stress of the other leader who elevates, of course, himself in an autocratic point of view. So it's an autocratic compared to a one who defends the democratic point of view of our country, democracy, and also the Democratic Party. And he is, I would say, sort of a centrist, which probably is a little leads or leans toward the right. I'm sorry, leans to the left. That is slightly liberal, not as radically liberal as Bernie Sanders, who would point to more of a socialism of the kind you find in Scandinavia, not Marxist, but what we would call democratic capitalism, um, democratic socialism, with what you would find in Scandinavia. And that's the more radical left wing part of the Democratic Party. And I would not see Biden going that far. He's more of a centrist, but he definitely is against the direction of the fascist approach on the Republican side. So that's how I would see the two leaders.
Okay. Now my way of looking at the situation is that it is heavily influenced by the political structure set up by the founders, which was set up to accommodate slavery and to protect the privilege of the investor class, the landed and the money class, so that the popular vote does not necessarily win an election. So that's the first thing. And I'm not saying that that's good or bad. I'm just saying that that's how I see it as being. Whether it's good or bad depends upon the point of view. That's my first observation.
Well, how would you summarize that again, if you would? Our government, as I see it, let's go back to the beginning of the settlers, if we may. They came from the earliest ones from England, really, and most of them were what we would call Puritans, and they came to find religious freedom because in England there were the uniformity laws of worshiping according to the Book of Common Prayer or the dictates of the Church of England. Because for centuries, the value of a church and state union was the good of culture, the society, where the state and the populace would have a unified culture, both in value and government. And this goes back centuries. This is nothing new. In fact, separation of church and state is a rather new development. It's an experiment, really, because going back, it was always a bringing together the church and state. And this goes back to the earliest times of Catholicism. So I don't want to go that far back, but we could. Okay, then the settlers came and they wanted freedom for themselves, first of all. Most of them were Calvinists, and they wanted freedom for themselves, not for other people who came over at first. Then gradually, I think it was the Baptists who came over, Roger Williams, who founded Rhode Island, Providence, and so forth. And he has stressed, well, let's bring the different groups together. The different, most of them were Puritans of one kind or another, but they were Protestant. Let's bring them together in sort of a unified way. And gradually they did become a little more unified. And there was a man named John Winthrop in 1630, I believe it is, who said, if we just unite and we could bring about a country that would bring an image of the future country as a city on the hill. You've heard that before, probably.
Yes.
The idea of a city on the hill. And so they would be pretty much fully united, that point of view. But there was a large minority, though. Now, that was a majority that sort of were leaning that direction. And then there was a large minority, though, that were Roman Catholic, Jewish, and even with the black slaves that were brought over, a lot of them were animists, and some were Muslims, and there were others who were deists. Different points of view, other than just the more or less the Protestant unified group. By the time that Jefferson came, Thomas Jefferson, there were many hills and many lights, if I may put it that way. So first of all, we just had the city on the hill, the city of light. But he said that one scholar said that there were many hills and many lights. And then came the Enlightenment. And that, of course, brought with it science and medicine and new education and new ways of creation of the Industrial Revolution and so forth and so on. And that came in the 1700s. And this brought a new humanism, a new outlook of the place that the secular world could add not only to the cultures that came before that, but a new idea of a stress of human accomplishment and natural human influence. And from that then came the inroads of what we call the Constitution, the beginning of it. And the forefathers of our country, you know well this, Jefferson, Madison, and Adams, and Hamilton, Washington, these leaders all were very much influenced by the Enlightenment. And there were two philosophers that they drew upon. One was John Locke. John Locke was an English philosopher who felt that the power, instead of from being on high, where you'd have a king and prelate or leader of the church, that the power should be with the people. This is something different, different. This is different from the top down. This is from below. That the power should be from the people. And then there was a French philosopher named Montesquieu, who came up with the view that there could be a balance of power from the local to a, say, state area to a national level, but also that you'd have legislature, and then you would have also the administration of a government and also the judicial, a balance there. And so the forefathers of our country then drew upon these philosophies as a new experience, a new experiment, what we call the Constitution. And so there was humanism there, a view that um, of openness to all kinds of truth. And they did add, though, that as being rather humanist, following the openness of the Enlightenment, and that we hold these truths to be self-evident, the preamble of the Constitution, that all men are created equal and endowed by the Creator of rights of life, freedom, and pursuit of happiness. Now, this makes a big difference than, say, straight secular point of view. There was an appeal of God there, and John Locke and Montesquieu all also held to the view of God. God being absent was very rare. Atheism was very rare. And so there was this point that was very important. But other than that, the openness of the Enlightenment thinking. So that's where we have the Constitution. And so the idea, the power of the people, based on the balance of local, regional, and national administration, the judicial, and the legislature. That is the basis of the philosophy of our Constitution. And so, yes, the people starts from there up instead of top down. Now that the data stress on the Republican side is the opposite, top down. That's fascist.
Well, it's authoritarian.
Well, same thing. Yeah.
I'm not sure about it being the same thing in the sense that it's totalitarian. It references royalty and the feudal as much as modern fascism.
Where's the feudal
Well,
in our today's society?
that's a good question. If you
That's
look,
passé. That's gone. The feudalism's gone.
well, but the roots are feudal in the sense that the authoritarian mindset goes back to European monarchy, which is
Well, yeah, that's where you have this certain church and state that's still there. That's the carryover from what I said earlier. Yeah, there was always that, and it goes back to the feudal system of the Middle Ages. Yeah,
and the mindset of that system, the leadership, the royalty was conservative, and the conservative did not at the time hold any sense that all men were created equal. As a matter of fact, those who were not of the privileged class were property and were treated as such, sometimes brutally, and with a real arrogance.
well, even today, people are not equal. It isn't just then, it's not equal today either. Even with our stress of being, but only in the eyes of God. And I think that if they were all pressed back there as being Christian from the beginning, all men are created, yeah, well, in the sense, they would all be seen as, in the eyes of God, yes, all are of equal value. If they really were pressed in their Christian doctrine, yes, it would have to be that each person has an immortal soul, right? They'd all have to say that, even the feudal society, but they didn't live it as they don't today.
Well, the roots of the feudal system precedes Christianity. It was it was peculiar in that the development of that society was very successful, and I don't understand all of it, but Um, I have looked at the British system of conservatism, which is kind of sociopathic. And as it turns out, sociopaths are probably the best, in many ways, the best, most successful at leading corporate activities, corporations, businesses. They don't have to, empathy does not have much to do with their decisions. However, for those people that depend upon the entities that they lead, if you're not one of the ones that gets sacrificed along the way, you benefit from their leadership. So there's a moral strain of sociopathy, or a psychological strain of sociopathy, that has pluses and minuses. And I think that as we look at the history, the way things developed, and through the early history of the U.S., we have to remember that New Amsterdam, New York City, was founded in the early 1600s, and that Virginia, the first attempts at settlement in Virginia, were actually by the Spanish, and California was first settled. California, including Texas, was first settled by the Spanish. But the ones who were the founders of the U.S. Included the southern slave states, the central states of New York, Delaware, and that central area, which is very powerful, and then the New England colonies. A lot of the new Enlightenment leadership came from the New England colonies, including Franklin and John Adams, Jefferson.
Yes, but they got it from Europe.
They got it from Europe, absolutely.
Right.
But they brought it here, and that it was said in England, in London, that they sold they sold more books in the U.S. or in the colonies than they did in England. It was a group of people who were remarkably well educated in the law. Jefferson, I would consider him an Enlightenment thinker, but he was a slaveholder. And when it came time to create the Constitution, to get the agreement of the South, which was absolutely necessary, they had to include concessions to the slave states. And that ultimately led to our situation of the
Well, that they were pretty much agrarian there in the southern states, and the cities developed more in the north. And so the complex of it was different, you know. So the agrarian and they're being farmers and wanting to grow cotton and so forth, so on, drew on stress more on the slavery and the economy of that than say the North. But they did
the ultimate upshot through the Declaration of Independence, the agreement on that, through the Confederate States, the ultimate result was a government, a weak national government, a national government that had many checks and balances, and it was designed for the independence of the states to be respected. And so what we have in this country today is a system based on autonomy, a high autonomy of the states in regards to the national government. And this resulting electoral system means that a state with a relatively small population can have an equal voice in electing a national government, and that national government then skews the interest towards the states with lower population. It's not the total population of the country that rules the country.
Well, it's the same thing with the Senate. It's the same thing with the Senate.
Well, absolutely.
Right.
That's a lot of what I'm talking about.
Yeah, the electoral college is one thing, and it's tied in a little bit more like the Senate in comparison to the House.
So that is the first consideration as we look at the political climate. When you look at the leadership that develops and the importance of leadership to the Republicans and the Democrats, we have to remember that both the Democrats and the Republicans answer to the interests of the individual states, which are sometimes do not consider all citizens equally. They have been known to suppress votes of certain social classes or racial. And once again, I am not commenting on whether this is all good or bad. I am simply saying this is what the situation is. Good or bad is not my consideration here. But I think the Democrats, your assessment of the Democrats, I think one of the reasons that things have developed as they have with the Republicans is that the Democratic Party has failed to nominate the highest possible quality of candidates for office. The Democratic Party has an entrenched leadership that hasn't been truly refreshed in many years, and they too have to answer to the system of the electoral college. So what the people's interest is not necessarily responded to by either the Democrats or the Republicans. Now, the question is, the next question in my mind is, if you look at the Democrats, they have typically, well, before I get to questions, the Democrats have typically responded, for instance, in very positive ways to the union movement, which was gutted back when Reagan was president. And why was that gutting successful? The gutting was successful because the union movement was conservative in nature, in that it served the individual interests of those in a particular trade or interest group, and the interest of the general population was ignored. And this ignoring of this general population is the resulting union movement became corrupt. It was often the work of gangsters, and it was subject to all of the weaknesses of political systems, because it did involve a political selection of leadership.
And talk about sociopaths.
Yes, yes. Once again, you
Yeah.
don't have built in any sort of way of dealing with the rise of sociopathic leaders. And to some extent, they are utilitarian. They serve a purpose. But this leads me to comment on capitalism as a model for organizing nations or society in general, and that is capitalism, I think, has a thing called market failure, which was defined by the Austrian school, and market failure as a part of capitalistic theory has not been adequately addressed. You have a system, as far as I know, and I'm not a deep scholar, but as far as I know, that system is an incomplete system. It was laid out, and it's very successful in some things.
Would you say supply and demand?
Yes, but in terms of long-term strategies, it's lacking. If you simply let the market work, sometimes it's going to make some people rich and some people are going to suffer, and not necessarily because they deserve to. Adam Smith, in his comments on capitalism, observed, for instance, that there are times when, due to circumstances, the worth of labor is not recompensed. In other words, it's a system that has built-in potential for injustice. And it's my suspicion, my intuition, that this is one of the things that feeds instability, because the working people are the ones who buy stuff. They are where your markets come from. And when you have people who are working and not getting sufficient pay, you lose their buying power and you lose stability in your system. So if that were...
You were off for a while, Frank. You cut off for a while.
Really?
Yeah, for a good about a minute or two.
Okay. Well, Adam Smith.
Yeah, you were talking about Adam Smith.
Yeah. said that there are times when, due to circumstances, that the working man is not adequately rewarded for his labor. And it's my suspicion, my intuition, that this is a significant market failure and responsible for larger market failures downstream. But that's just one example of market failure. And until capitalism has the gumption, until the people who are accumulating wealth at the top realize that they are losing wealth, future wealth, because they're not honestly addressing the failures of capitalism.
I totally agree. And there's another point too, that one of the characteristics of capitalism is competitiveness,
Yes.
competition. And in other words, a small businessman is very important, that one competes with another, and as it applies to the total picture. And what happens is the bigger companies then become political and push out the small man.
This is
big against the small, and so then what it develops then are your trusts, to the point that they control. And what they do is they contradict themselves. They eliminate competition then.
Exactly. And that is one of the major failures, market failures, because when you do that, you lose the effectiveness of the design.
Self-defeating.
Right. It is self-defeating.
That's where Teddy Roosevelt came in.
But the person who stands to gain wealth will use a significant amount of that wealth to protect privilege. And the idea of protecting privilege is deeply human and also deeply conservative, with its roots in European conservative, certainly, but maybe all society. It is natural. If you've got power, you enjoy it, you want to hold on to it, and the long range effects are very destructive. And until we find ways of addressing that and addressing the market failures involved, we are on a downhill spiral. We are destroying our own planet.
And also another angle is the realizing that if you stress business to the point that you take your company abroad because of cheap labor.
Well, that has an upside and a downside. Globally, that's global justice and bringing balance to the world.
But it undercuts labor in this country.
Yeah, it does. But if South American business were strong enough and the South American economies were strong enough, we wouldn't have an immigration problem.
Partly, yeah, that'd be one of the issues.